All right, coach. So we were trying to formally talk or informally talk off camera, and we both agreed that this is the best and most pure way. We're just going to keep it completely authentic like we've done with all these other ones. And, I'm super excited to talk with you today. It was an organic way that we even, did this or arranged this on Twitter somehow. So for those that don't know, our members out there, go ahead and introduce yourself, coach, and look forward to this podcast together.
Yeah, I'm Tony Holler. I'm just a retired chemistry teacher. I was 38 years in the business, retired 3 years ago, but I'm continuing to coach track and field at Plainfield North High School. And we're living in an absolutely crazy era where, when I was a young coach, for somebody to read something I wrote was basically would not happen. I would have to send something to a magazine or something.
Yeah, you need a publisher, all that.
Yeah. But about 10 years ago, I was asked to write an article for our state track association. And I wrote something and got good feedback. And since then, I've written like 200 things. And, I've started to produce content. And, I've presented in 22 states and 2 foreign countries. And none of that could have happened back when I started in 1981. It couldn't have happened in 91, 2001, maybe even 2011. But we're just living in an era where a nobody high school track coach could actually be read and listened to. So it's kind of fun here in the twilight of my coaching career to be able to talk the things I love to talk about.
So you talked about being there for that long, and that makes me want to have a whole bunch of different questions, and we'll get to them all. Sticking with just strength and conditioning and sprinting and whatnot, what has been, you've seen a lot of different things. What would be your piece of advice or things that you've noticed? Because an episode we just dropped today with Jeff Moyer, literally it was like a history lesson where he talked about what's new was actually old and all of that. So getting your experience on the last, you said 36 years, so 39, 40 plus years.
Yep. Well, yeah, in my 41 years, and I think I even go back further than that, because my father I am very close to my father, but he was a high school and college basketball coach for 47. Oh, wow. So like I was his wingman. I went everywhere, his locker rooms, high school hallways, games, scouted games, all those things. So I've always been that, kind of a coach's kid that became a coach. And I have 2 sons that are coaches as well. And to tell you the truth, I mean, I started off as a basketball coach, and I got fired after 8 years of being a head basketball coach in the state of Illinois. And that's all I really wanted to do. And because I had 4 little kids, I had to reinvent myself. I couldn't leave teaching. My wife and I both taught, and teachers don't have much mobility because they lose tenure. It's scary as hell. You can't both you and your wife get a job in the district. So we thought we were stuck there forever. So I just reinvented myself in a sport that nobody cared about, track and field. And I started to have unusual success, even though I wasn't coaching it well yet. I just kind of coached it like a basketball coach, like just, work kids hard and all that kind of stuff. But then probably the biggest change in my life did not come from like a mentor or it came from my son. My son, Alec, in the 8th grade could dunk a basketball and great athlete. And I was looking forward to him being a great track athlete for me. And he told me one day, "No, I'm not going to do track in high school, Dad. Track sucks."
That must have broke your heart.
And I said, "Yeah, but," and I thought, wait a minute, it really does suck. It's awful.
It's awful.
We go out and run in the cold and the rain, and we just run till we're tired, and then we run further. And then if guys don't make time, we make them run extra, and the kids don't like it. And I'm like, what if we undertrained athletes? What if I took all my kids and just sprinted and jumped and worked in like 5-second intervals, and they went home kind of skipping, like happy? I think I could get kids like Alec out for my team. And if we had better athletes, we're going to kick some ass. Because in track, athletes win. It's not coaches. Athletes win. You could probably argue in all sports. Yeah. Athletes win. And so I call those athletes cats. So by feeding the cats, I'm nurturing the cat-like instincts of sprinters and jumpers. And I said, to hell with the distance races. I didn't care. We boycotted the 2 mile, and we became a juggernaut of a track team because we had better athletes than everybody else. But here's the deal. Because we wrote down everything we did, we timed kids. I found out that what we were doing was making kids faster. And it wasn't the elites that improved the most. It was the kids unexposed to speed training. It was the generic try hard kid that we used to just run till he's tired. Now
like
we're trained.
I wasn't the athlete. I was just the gritty kid that would just keep going.
Hey, Justin, we all were. Coaches come from a background of slowness. We were the try hard kids. We resented the cats because they didn't work as hard as us, and they scored the touchdowns, and it pissed us off. I will say that in every sport, that slow people run the sport, even in track and field. You know who runs track and field? Distance coaches. They run it. Who runs baseball? Catchers. I mean, it's who runs football? Quarterbacks. Quarterbacks aren't the fastest guy on the team. The center fielder doesn't coach the baseball team. So I really believe that we as coaches, and we just have to accept the fact that we see things through a grinder's eyes, but we need to see other things too. And so I have done the total transformation. Of course, from 1999 till now, Feed the Cats has really evolved. And now I'm doing work in lacrosse. New York Yankees fed the Cats in spring training this year. And so
that's why they're in the ALCS right now.
That's what I heard. I heard that it was that sprint-based approach in spring training.
I saw that on ESPN, actually. So kudos to you. That's why we're doing this.
Did you really? No. Shoot. I was hoping maybe they were giving me a shout out or something on ESPN, but no, it's funny stuff. But anyway, that's where it all kind of changed. And once you start seeing the world through different lenses, you start to explore further. And so that's been the major thing that turned me around.
Now, what would you say to anybody? And I literally saw it happen in 2021. I was with 2 of my colleagues. We work with the track and field team. We break it up. The sprint jump turtles have their own strength coach, the distance girls and the throwers, right? And we think we do a really good job by doing that. And we went to the league championship, and we are very sprint dominant. And, even in the throws, we dominant. And that was kind of the forte, right? Like almost a feed the cats style. Like we're going to score points in the explosive things. And literally watched the league championship. We went from 1 to 2nd as all the distance events went on because nobody in our league valued it. And then Elon, they just swept everybody in those distance events and an opportunity to win. What would you say to any of the people that say, hey, look at that success?
Sure. I think I have probably one of the 5 best distance coaches in the state of Illinois alongside me in track and field.
Okay.
I no longer, when I talked about, to hell with the distance events, I was talking about coaching at a school where we had 2 coaches, me and a throws coach. And so, so now, I just think that you just really have to separate the distance events from the sprint events.
100%.
You really, and that's the problem with distance coaches coaching track and field is they see running as running, and running and sprinting are really, really different. I think they're as different as running and swimming. It's just different mechanics. It's a different energy system. The CNS, I always say sprinting is electrical. It's not, it's not muscular, and people are like, oh my God, muscles is what move the body.
Come on.
But the nervous system creates a nanosecond contraction followed by a nanosecond relaxation that the weight room cannot do. And that's why weight room without sprinting is just blows me away.
I had that conversation with somebody the other day because they were talking about, putting a 10 to 1 on an Olympic lift. I was like, look, at best, you have somebody that's tall and doing a snatch. You're at 3 and change meters per second. You move that slow out there on a sporting field, like you're everyone's getting fired. for our listeners out there that are maybe aren't familiar with your classification from distance to sprint, like where as a track coach do you kind of put that cutoff, whether it's indoor or outdoor?
That's a really, really good question. And I think there's a lot of confusion, especially among distance coaches, that my sprinters do the 6 field events. They're all speed based. They're all neurological. They're all explosive. My sprinters do the hurdles, and my sprinters do the 400. Every single sprinter runs the 400, and that's because the 400 is a sprint.
Yeah.
If you just,
it's a very painful sprint.
It hurts, and that's a really good, Justin. That's so important too, because a lot of distance coaches think if you run enough, the last 100 meters becomes easy.
Ooh.
Well, if it's easy, then you're not running fast enough.
No, it's not.
I say that everybody is going to struggle in that last 100 meters because of acidosis. I mean, you're just burning up, and as you know, acidosis shuts down glycolysis, and glycolytic shutdown is not much fun. I mean, you literally can't move, or you may die because your pH drops below 7.3, and you'll definitely throw up because you're purging acid from your system. So what I tell my sprinters is that we're not trying to make the 400 easy. We're trying to be fast. We want to be in the lead at the 300 mark and be competitive as hell in the last 100. And we will learn how to sprint further. And those adaptations happen much quicker than speed adaptations. Matter of fact, speed grows like a tree, which causes a lot of people to abandon speed. They recruit speed, and then they abandon it because it just takes too long to get there. The good news is you don't have to do it an hour a day. Matter of fact, you can't. I would
You're
argue,
wrong. You are so wrong. If you ask the team.
I would argue that you can prioritize speed and spend about 30 minutes 3 times a week doing work. And you could still say you're prioritizing it, even though it maybe is 1/10 of your total time. And so when people in your business like, oh, I don't like that Holler guy because he thinks we should prioritize speed, and they see that as neglecting other things, and it's not. It just means you have to sprint train when you're fresh, and you have to be very, very surgical on when you speed train and how long you do it, because you just got to be fresh or your nervous system does not respond.
How about the people in team sport that probably have bastardized it or ruined it to an extent, making athletes maybe that in team sports that don't need it, or like people would say in basketball, the court's too short, or if if you're an offensive lineman, if you're a strength coach for football and you have your offensive lineman, doing fly 10s, like what have you seen has been the best and the worst implementation of feed the cats in team sports?
Well, the best is probably,
again, and hold on, let me caveat this. I'm not asking you to call out people, but just from a 10,000 foot view.
Yeah, that's actually going to be the topic of my presentation at the Track Football Consortium that we're having in Chicago on December 9th and 10th. And that is, let the sport train the sport. Now, having said that, what that means to me is that we want to create athletes outside of the sport, that we do not want to worry about endurance, that sport-specific endurance outside of the sport. We want to lift heavy, sprint fast, the most important thing, and jump high, jump far, and the fourth thing, bounce. We want to train those qualities of athleticism. And I think too much people worry about that conditioning endurance thing just constantly. They want to be in mid-season shape on the first day of football practice, and they think that that's a good idea. It sounds good. But the problem is, if you are training for endurance all summer, you're not training athletic qualities, and athletic qualities win. It's not how long you can do something in third gear. It's how many times you can do something in fifth gear. And I think that goes for every sport. Princeton this year took a feed the cats approach. They called it feed the tigers in lacrosse. They made it to the Final Four for the first time in 18 years. They started off, this is amazing, 3 kids that could run 20 miles an hour on a college lacrosse team. 1 year later, they had 20 kids that could run 20 miles an hour. And
how are they measuring that for any of our listeners out there wondering?
Just unlimited run in flies. You know, you can do 10-yard flies, 10-meter flies, 20-yard flies, whatever you want. And then you can calculate miles per hour.
Yep.
And I would argue that changing an athlete 1 mile an hour is a game changer. They had 4 kids that changed by 2 miles an hour. And I think too many times, Bush Exnader says that 80% of all college football players never reach their genetic ceiling for speed. Because as you said in the question, some people bring kids in that are fast. They love fast kids, but then they neglect it because it takes too long to change. And, you know, one of the things that talk sports specific, I saw the other day that Steph Curry last year averaged 2.7 miles of running per game. And if you do the math, which I did, it was just slightly under 13 minutes a mile. Now, it would be intuitive for somebody to say, we need to go on a 3-mile run every day in the off season. How fast? Well, let's keep it under 13 minutes. But as you know, we laugh about that, right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of the mentality I see in team sports, is they're just so focused on conditioning and think that speed is in DNA. It's immutable, unchangeable. They love speed, and then they do other things.
So is the chicken or the egg? Is it the sport coach or the sports performance coach that ruins it?
That ruins it? I think that S&C people do not have enough autonomy and enough power in the sports world, because I think coaches are just hell-bent on doing hard things and conditioning and rules and blah, 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 that have nothing to do with winning games. And so it's so weird for me. I don't have an S&C coach. I'm everybody. I'm the track coach. I'm the lifting coach. I'm the sprint. I'm all those things. So I don't have to have those conflicts.
You are the high performance model. You are all of them, right? Like,
correct. Yes. I'm in a high performance measured sport, which, you know, and as you know, in the team sports, it's so unmeasured and so subjective that coaches just really resort to the traditional, you know, Junction Boys, Bear Bryant approach.
yeah,
They see, this is funny, you know, the famous Lombardi quote that every coach says. He says, fatigue makes cowards of us all.
yeah.
And everybody's like, yeah, I totally agree. But what does that mean? So what that means to a football coach is we need to run them to death in order for them not
to avoid the fatigue. So we're never
Yeah.
cowards.
But what are you doing to them? You're fatiguing them. And so my book that I'm putting out next year is called Tired is the Enemy. It pretty much sums up Feed the Cats, is that we don't want to be tired. Why? Because when you're tired, you're a coward. And so we want to train high level stuff. I say that extreme results never come from moderate exercise. But what do I see when I go to a football practice? A shit ton of moderation. I mean, it is just moderation. Why? It's because for some reason, even though in a 3-hour football game, a one-way player only plays about 5 minutes. For some reason, football coaches think practice looks better when you're running from drill to drill.
Oh God, on the hop, it's the worst.
On the hop. Effort on the hop. They never say fast because their players are too tired to be fast. So it's always effort on the hop. And when I talk to football coaches, they say, coaches, makes all the sense in the world. But damn, if I lose,
oh my God, yeah,
I'm out, because my practices will look soft. But you know, if the game is choppy, practice has to be choppy.
Yep.
Good friend Dan Casey, when he 2 years ago in North Carolina, he instituted a halftime in football practice, and his football coaches almost mutinied, his assistants.
I'm sure.
Right? I mean, that's not the way
practice has to be harder than the game, coach.
Yes. Yes, my
Training
dad used
harder
to
than
say,
practice.
we're going to make practice hard so games are easy.
Yeah.
No, 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 no. He was wrong. He was just flat out wrong. But my dad also was right. When it came to a championship level game, he'd call us all together and say, guys, no conditioning this week. And we're only going to practice an hour a day. And we go out and kick ass on Friday night. And on the way home, he'd say, hey, it worked, didn't it? And I'd be like, why haven't we done that all year? And to his credit, he thought about it. And see, that's kind of a feed the cats thing, is like, if we could be fresh, healthy, happy, explosive, wouldn't that kind of take care of the fourth quarter? And
right.
I know for sure it does.
Yeah, I mean, and that you open a can of worms when you say that, because one thing I've always asked my athletes, I was like, hey, how much more are the points in the fourth quarter worth than the first, second, or third? And they all just kind of, they look at me and I'm like, oh, you're right. So they're all important. Like any time that, like, if we've blown out an opponent, I'm like, how important did you care about the fourth quarter when we were up, 52-0? Oh, you didn't, right? Like, when you handle business, it doesn't, you don't need to wait for it to be close at the end of the game if you take care of it. What would you say then to, I guess I think I know what your answer would be, if as a sports performance coach, hey, that practice is going to look like X and it's going to be slow because that's what the coaches are going to do. And, you said you want the sport to train the sport, but if, we neglect it and we know that those coaches are going to do that, don't we as sports performance coaches have to try, like, how do we feed the cats while still trying to not let our athletes get wrecked when they're going to be going into a situation like, preseason camp? Because again, it really, from any conversations I've had with any of this, sports performance coaches we have here, once the NCAA tells coaches you can go from 8 to 20, that preseason shit changes, for lack of a better term.
This is the life you live, and all S&C people, especially in the football world, live this life, and it's I don't think there's a good answer except for changing the way the coach looks at it.
I agree.
I wrote an article called "Stop Doing Mindless Conditioning" about 5 years ago, and the reason for that is I had a good athlete that was going to college to play, and they were going to do one of those stupid conditioning tests, like 16 110s, one per
You
minute.
shouldn't have said stupid before that, coach. That's a classic condition.
The classic stupid conditioning test. And so he asked me, how should I train for that? And I thought, we're probably gonna have to train like a middle distance runner. And I thought, that's bullshit, because right now you're a step slow, son.
Yeah, you're not gonna get a step slower.
You are going to detrain speed by preparing for the conditioning test, but the conditioning test is there. So all I can say is this, that a very underrated thing that may not be in a textbook, but I know it's true, is that you can get aerobically in shape by stacking together anaerobic work. I just believe that with all my heart. Story example, good friend Brian Kula trains Christian McCaffrey. Before his MVP season, there was an article written. People sent me the article like, hey, Brian Kula's feeding the cats. I called him. He said, I've never heard of you, and from that, we became good friends. But one of the things he told me was that they never do anything for more than 5 seconds in the off season. Nothing. Now they will develop capacity because they're doing like maybe 100 5-second things or 200 5-second things, which, by the way, sounds a lot like football. And so nothing more. They didn't one time run a lap. They didn't one time run a mile, ever, ever, ever. And I said, wait, do the Panthers have a conditioning test? He goes, yes. I said, oh, was there hell to pay? He goes, no, Christian won it.
Oh, shit. What was the test? What they have to do? Did he share it?
I can't remember if it was the classic shuttle tests, the 300, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. You know what? You brought that up and it made me think of this all-pro offensive lineman that used to go back and train at Iowa. And for the longest time, he would be training in the off season, maybe February or early March. And he'd be training like a football player with the team. And he'd be doing the speed work, or maybe, just a little bit of it. And then he'd go in and lift heavy and explosive. And then we had to, he'd even be doing like skills and he'd be doing stuff that was football. And then as it got closer to when he had to report, we had to stop doing those things and had to literally get him ready to run that, the 25-yard interval, 300-yard shuttle so he could pass it. When it's like, how, crazy is it that, again, you do have to do it.
Yep. And so I'm torn, but I'm more and more, as time in the last 5 years, I'm more and more convinced that you don't have to train like a distance runner to pass that test. If you are a good athlete, and there is incredible aerobic fitness, like one time Cal Dietz spoke at TFC about aerobic conditioning. And I followed him talking about how don't do aerobic conditioning. And I was like, God, that's pretty dumb for me to schedule Cal Dietz right before me. But when I think about conditioning or aerobic work, I think about long, continuous stuff. Stadium steps.
Boyle's even talked about this. He talked about it at one of the it might have been one of his videos he put out, or it was at one of the CSCCA conferences I went to, but he talked about increasing aerobic output, meaning like, oh, your heart rate's above 130 or 135, whatever the population is. He's like, well, I wanted to think, are we already doing it? And then when he put heart rate monitors on his people that were doing his warm-up of dynamic warm-up, and they were going like a box jump, a 10-yard A-cell, and like medicine ball throws, how like actually as they were doing those explosive efforts, like you said, with a rest, but minimal-ish rest, the heart rate never actually dropped below 135 the entire time.
For sure. So what Cal Dietz presented, which seemed like the antithesis of what I was going to present after him, was talking about how to get aerobically in shape, like in the weight room. He was just talking about crowding together alactic anaerobic work. You're just stacking anaerobic work on top of each other, like you said, without total recovery. And there's some magical, and I see this magical effect with my sprinters. My sprinters never run more than 200 meters in practice, ever. 99% of their training is 5 seconds or less. I mean, but yet my 400 guys, my 4x4 guys will beat athletes from other schools that have done 10 times more training because they've trained, the aerobic system. They've done those 2-mile runs before practice and that 1-mile run for a cool down after practice. We don't do that crap.
Have you ever had any of your athletes, what do your athletes say when they come back? Like after being a cat and getting fed, right? And then they go to college, and whether they become a track athlete or a team sport athlete, like what has been any of the feedback or things that they tell you?
It's not all positive. I mean, it's positive towards me, but I would say 90% of college track coaches just do huge amounts of volume in the fall. And even guys that I think are enlightened at the college level, and there's not many of them, but
college football or track?
Well, I would say both.
Yeah, no,
I'm more aware of the track problems. Even those guys that I just love, 99% of the things they say, well, in the fall, we have to increase our capacity to do work in the spring. I go, you mean, so you're working all fall so you can have 2-hour practices in the spring? Well, yeah. And I'm like, why do you need 2-hour practices? And I think it's because a college track coach doesn't do anything else. He doesn't teach 5 classes of chemistry. And so if they're not practicing for 2 hours, he's not justifying his tens of thousands of dollars he's making as a track coach or something. But you can't practice sprinting for 2 hours. And so I believe that all the hard work that happens in the fall actually negates speed. It runs kids off. There are a few college programs that are Feed the Cats track programs. And there's many high school football programs that are, and there's probably more college programs than I know of that have given up on just running the dog out of kids, that we want to reward performance. We want to recover more in practice. The health of our athletes is more important than their conditioning. Those kinds of things. But it's still, if a kid, to sum it up, if a kid coming from my program goes to a old school program, they don't adjust very well. That doesn't mean I'm wrong, but
No,
they don't adjust very well.
for my own, we were just talking about college football, and it's a question that I've had and I've asked other people, and I want to know your opinion on it. I feel like there's even differences of it, alactic, aerobic, within the positions within the sport, right? Like
Oh,
you
yeah,
take a
yeah.
defensive back, they might not actually even do anything if it's a run player, if it's a pass play, like they might backpedal break if they're playing zone coverage and they're not really doing anything hard. Defensive linemen usually get rotated in and out just as often as wide receivers and running backs or tight ends do. Like a tight end or a receiver running backs run a deep ball, they're probably coming out. But, an offensive lineman, I feel like that they're probably more of a lactic bath because it might be that repeat high intensity effort. But say, like, again, thinking about them, they're going to say they block, they fall, they got to get up, go back to the huddle, go to the line. Like they are a slightly different energy system than everybody else. And then, I mean, you have your kickers and punters. My long snapper, I feed the cats with him, and they've both loved it. I'm like, look, you are a 60-meter track and field athlete that has to change direction and make that other athlete. And they don't get conditioned. Our long snappers, kickers, punters don't get conditioned. They literally will just do a little bit of speed work if my kickers, punters want to. My long snapper will do some sprint work based off of the new rule where he can't be covered. But I'll stop rambling. And what would you say about the fact that there's probably even differences energy system wise in the sport of football?
There absolutely is. I'm just not so sure that they need that specific stuff supplemented outside of the game. I think the best way for an offensive lineman to get in shape is to do offensive lineman stuff. That's where I mean, like, let the sport train the sport. I think the number one quality, I think, for an offensive lineman is to have the right height, arm length, and size to play that position. But among guys that fit that bill, it is the guys that are fastest that will be chosen first in the NFL. Because, and that's where I'd say let the sport train the sport. Too many people take offensive linemen and say, we're going to do 20 10-yard sprints up a ramp because they don't need speed. And what I say is, let's create athletes. In the off season, let's create athletes. The average high school big kid doesn't sprint one time in the off season. They call them sprints, but it's conditioning.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Back and forth, 20 accelerations up a hill, things like that. They call them sprints, but they're not sprints. So what I have found is that the fastest offensive linemen are chosen first in the NFL because the faster you are at the 40-yard dash, the faster your first step. The faster you are at the 40-yard dash, the longer your career will be in the NFL, because slow doesn't age well. Slow people get old faster than fast people. Tom Petty says, never slow down, never grow old. And I truly believe that he was onto something that all S&C people need to revere. And if the 40-yard dash is a differentiator among good college offensive tackles, then you have to ask, why isn't that being trained at the college level more? And it's usually because you're trying to stay too specific. Just accelerations. We're working on energy system work. We're working on specific stuff for football instead of more general but important athletic qualities. I think offensive tackles need to learn how to jump higher and jump farther and learn how to bounce. Because the average 6'3", 230-pound high school kid that I see is not an athlete. He's just big. And so you run the hell out of him and you lift the hell out of them, and they are not being turned into athletes. I mean, if you get a 6'3", 220-pound kid that plays basketball in high school, now you have the best offensive tackle in the area because he's an athlete. And so if that's the case, let's start training big kids to be athletes in high school and college. I think it's a no-brainer, and I just don't see it being done enough.
You've talked about, your X factor training and how that pairs and how you're like, so let's switch gears and talk a little bit about that and how it, pairs well with your, sprint work.
Well, sprint work is repetitive. I think every sprint speed session I have, I tell my kids, don't get bored. Seriously, it's, we can't do new fun stuff every day. Like if you play baseball, you got to hit. You got to hit a lot. Well, to be a sprinter, you got to sprint a lot. I love Wooden's 8 laws of learning: explanation, demonstration, imitation, repetition, 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 repetition. That's the way I feel about sprint training. However, I also have learned from people in your field that if we are not exposed to a new stimulus, we don't grow. And I think that is true too. It's possible to have two things true at the same time. Repetition is the key to learning, okay? But a new stimulus is also really important. So my speed days are repetitive. My X factor days are varied, creative. I try shit. I mean, like we have certain things that we do a lot, like drills over my last 25 years that I've found that fast people do them really well and slow people don't. So let's get the slow people doing those drills better. And it's a lot. When I think of X factor, I think of plyos. I mean, we do plyos. Now, a lot of people in your business question me like, wait. Now that's highly CNS driven stuff that you're talking about. Yes, it is. Well, how do you not burn the steak? How do you not create a CNS overload when you're doing this high CNS work almost every day? And my answer is it's so microdosed. I mean, literally a sprint workout. One time I videoed a kid doing a sprint workout and I cut out all the downtime and the video lasted 82 seconds. I'm like, shit, this is unbelievable. And everybody thinks I'm Mr. like high velocity, all we do is sprint full speed. In that speed workout, he was at top speed for 6 seconds. 6 of the 82 seconds, he was at top speed. So just shut up about me burn the steak, because I'm too highly intense, blah, blah, blah. Our recovery is so big that it allows us to be intense for those 82 seconds. Same can be said about our X factor work. If I did a video of every single thing we did in a 45-minute X factor session, I would think that video would be less than 2 minutes. And not one single clip of more than 5 or 6 seconds.
What would you talked about the word stimulus, and that made me think of a conversation that a colleague and I have had. He ran track and field in college. He works with the sprint jump hurdle group. And he's learned sprint mechanic and works with his population with it too. But he's always asked me, he's like, look, how much do you think sprint mechanic drills actually are worth doing with team sport athletes? Because if it takes so long to learn it in track and field, and is it enough of a stimulus that you actually see actionable change? So I'm asking you the same question, being the fact that you're way better at this than me.
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think you have to be a sprint guru to coach sprinting. I think if you did nothing more than time full speed sprints, that there would be organic change happen in your athletes. Time those sprints, record, rank, and publish them. If you did nothing more than that, if you never coached the kids at all, you would see some sprint improvements that would become a pattern for that kid. And all of a sudden he's running faster all the time. So I don't think you have to be a guru. Matter of fact, I think complexifiers are terrible sprint coaches. And most of the sprint coaches at the highest level are just in a pissing contest.
Yeah, they would mess Usain Bolt up like they'd find.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I'm not much on the complexifiers. I just want to be simple and effective in what I do. So I got off on a tangent there. So the question, reel me back in.
So mechanics, like how is there
got it.
enough time time in the limited 8-hour window with a team sport athlete to improve mechanics?
I totally understand when people like my business partner, Chris Corfus, say speed drills don't work. I totally understand what he's talking about, but I do speed drills. And the reason why is because when do you coach? When do you coach a kid to sprint? If you're not doing things and talking to them about why we do things and trying to be snappy, trying to be bouncy, trying to get that big split of our thighs with more in the front side than the back side. All sprinters are front side. That's the difference between running and sprinting. Front side versus equal. You just got to get your knee up and foot in front of your body in order to hammer down. So I have stuck with speed drills, the old Lauren Seagrave stuff, for 25 years, because that's where I coach. Now, having said that, if you don't know what in the hell you're coaching, I think the speed drills are worthless. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't have anything to say, maybe speed drills aren't important. But that's where I teach. That's where I educate. So I do them. And then they do create a necessary warm-up for actually sprinting. If they're done right, and we do them right, we do them really snappy, fast, intense. We don't talk as we do it. If somebody talks during a speed drill, I send their ass home. I mean, we just don't put up with that. I tell my kids, if every team in Illinois works harder than us, what do we have to do? And they kind of look at each other like, I don't know. Every team's going, yes, they are. What are we going to have to do today in our 82 seconds of work? We got to go. Amen. We got to go. So we have that intensity, that culture of speed, and, it works well. I think there's way too many people that abandon sprint stuff because either they don't think they know enough to coach it, or it just does, they don't see change fast enough. And hey, if you're not timing, you won't see change. I mean,
keep going.
Yeah, you're not going to like say, oh my God, look at that kid now. Because, you don't see the growth of it. We have a tree in our front yard that's pretty young. I have not seen that it's grown this year, but it has. Yeah. And so that's the way I look at speed. And if you're not timing it to the 100th of a second using free lap or something, and you're not yelling out the time. I consulted with a lacrosse program, a Division I lacrosse program, that were running sprints. Good job. But they weren't yelling out the times. They go, oh, we send a spreadsheet out later in the day. They need instant feedback. Every time one of my kids run, they either swear or celebrate. So every single time.
So I now have to interject, because I do the record, rank, publish from what you've talked about. All right. We do that here at Towson. We will we'll do it where we'll do what you said. We pull up the timing gates. I call the timeout. The players hear it. Same thing. They're swearing or they're celebrating with their teammates. We record it. We send it out via text and email to the players and coaches, and then we'll post it literally in the weight room too. But following that same thought process, what we also just invested in is the display clock as well. So now and what my thought process behind it was, how can I get it even better, where we can put that near the start so the athletes that are waiting can see it. I can stand by the end, project my voice to the athlete that just finished running. And now athletes are going to want to, like, hey, just like Usain Bolt does his little thing when he sets a PR, hey, you set a PR, you get to take or something, you know what I mean? Like, that's an instant way to drive intent. And the baseball strength and conditioning coach was doing some sprint work with his players the other day, and he pulled out the time, pulled out the clock. It was the first time. And he's like, bro, we had 8 PRs. And I'm like, listen, I don't know if it's simply because of that, but it was cool to know that he, he was like, hey, let me try it. Let me see how it worked. And selfishly, I was like, that's awesome that happened.
Yes, there's so much in what you're just saying. What I've noticed, okay, cats, a pure cat, everybody has a little cat in them, but a pure cat is not much fun to coach. They seem lazy. They have really high outputs when they go, but they seem lazy. Otherwise, they don't seem to try hard, but they're incredibly competitive. I mean, like guys that are otherwise lazy will like get in a scuffle with somebody down in line because they're like, they want to beat that guy's time so damn bad. And when you call out a time, the entire group down there hears it.
Yep.
I mean, sometimes they'll clap for the guy or something. It is just so cool to do. And I think that something we have not mentioned when you talk about the baseball thing, I think sprinting is more important than running poles. Or
fuck yeah. I mean, come on now, like please.
Or the Omaha Challenge and blah, blah, blah. It's just stop.
Zach Dacan has been a very big advocate of making sure, like, in talking about speed with respect to the sport of baseball. Yeah.
Love Zach. He never gets too far away. And one of the things I said, we had Zach on a TFC podcast. And one of the things I asked him, two things. Do you ever stray too far from performance? He said, well, early we try to ramp up to sprinting. And I said, well, we sprint from day one. And his eyes opened up and went, I need to know more about that. But you're afraid to hurt people.
Do you just limit the distance or what?
We're just kind of microdosed. And he asked me, how do you get away with that, you think?
I said, I was about to say, it's got to be because of how the fact you have your athletes all the time in high school, right?
Not really. I'm away from them 6 months a year, but we really encourage multi-sport.
Yep.
If a kid cannot sprint on day one, what in the hell have they been doing?
Fair.
You're right. Really? Do we have to assume that they've been sitting in a chair for 6 months? No, they know they're going to sprint on day one. Now, I am dealing with teenagers. They may be more elastic. They have not been exposed to the lifting. Don't get me wrong, that college kids have been exposed to.
Yeah.
If a college baseball player lifts his ass off all summer and never sprints, he will get hurt on day one. I mean, because sprinting offsets the negative things that come from the weight room. When you are contracting and relaxing in a nanosecond, you are counteracting those longer, slower contractions and relaxation.
Yes. Yep.
And so that's why you need both, and you need to prioritize speed without deprioritizing lifting. It just basically means sprint when you're fresh. You can lift after you sprint. But the other thing I asked Zach, and this is important, I said, do you think that consistent sprint training results in a healthier baseball player, fewer soft tissue injuries? He's like, 100%. 100%. And that's the way I think too. Chris Corfus worked with several guys for the Chicago Bears. David Montgomery, Mooney. Well, they tried to get, I won't name him. They tried to get one of their bigger tight ends to come to sprint train. And this guy said, no way am I sprinting in the summer. Think about that one. No way am I sprinting in the summer. Well, I wonder
if you're going to have to sprint when you go to play football.
And the reason why he's not going to sprint is injury. I can't risk a summer injury with a hamstring. Oh, so you're just going to postpone that till
save that injury for a later date.
Yeah, save it for the season. I saw the other day where I think it was in game 2 for the Broncos. They had 4 guys out with hamstrings.
Yeah.
4. And somebody accused me of attacking Lauren Landau or something, I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not blaming anybody. It may be different factors. It may be that these 4 guys did a shit ton of lifting and did no sprinting in the summer. That possibly was the reason. Nobody knows. But I know that 4 hamstring injuries, that's unacceptable. I mean, as coaches, we have to be like, oh, what's happening here?
Oh, 100%. You talked about at the beginning of it, the podcast, that you had to reinvent yourself. Without, you can go into detail on that if you want, but for our listeners that are maybe trying to reinvent themselves, whether it's with a sport or just trying to reinvent themselves in today's world of strength and conditioning, what's some advice that you'd give them on, how to do it? And to, you can say what you want about a quote unquote nobody strength track coach that you are, but people know who you are, like you said. So you were successful at reinventing yourself. What would be some piece of advice that you'd give to our listeners out there?
And I would say the first thing is that reinvention, I can say that it started in 99, but I would like to think that I reinvent myself consistently, and that maybe the pillars of Feed the Cats: record, rank, publish, tired is the enemy, not the goal, don't burn the stake, never stray from performance, make practice the best part of a kid's day. Maybe those things never change, but the details change. Things are added, things are subtracted. Too many times coaches say, trust the process, and they think they're being just brilliant or something. And I almost want to stick a finger down my throat, because trust the process to me says trust tradition.
Don't think critically when you say trust the process.
That's right. And a good friend of mine that's a great coach says, if you have to say trust the process a lot, your kids don't see the value in what they're doing. And it's like, well, maybe. And I've just found that it is amazing. And like people say, like, wait, you don't do tempo running? How? And I said, I'm not saying that tempo running is bad. Maybe I've just found that I can have really good athletes without tempo running. And it's just you just need to constantly re-examine and surround yourself with people that question you, that you can argue with and still drink a beer with them, and I've done that. If I had one bit of advice for an S&C guy, I would say feed the cats. And that's not self-serving. I'm not selling them anything. I'm just saying that have an open mind, start sprinting and recording times. That speed is the tide that lifts all boats. That if you're fast, people say, oh, change of direction is more important than speed in football. Okay, would you rather have a fast guy doing that or a slow guy? You say, well, power is really important in football. Okay, would you rather have a fast, powerful guy or a slow, fast? And then, even like conditioning, speed reserve might be all you need to be really effective in the fourth quarter. You might not need a single gasser. Matter of fact, Feed the Cats football teams do zero conditioning at the end of practice. Zero.
Yeah. And Feed the Cat football teams, good football teams, intelligent football teams don't do gassers either, just because what are you doing? Junk volume, just complete junk volume.
You are diminished by doing that work at the end of practice, which is, it's just silly. So so many of the S&C people who have joined my inner circle have said that S&C people don't realize that they don't have to throw out everything to become sprint based. To become sprint based is really just a commitment to not stray from sprinting.
Hearing you talk about reinvent yourself, and kudos to you. I apologize for not saying, like, obviously you're continuing to evolve now. A conversation that I had with a track and field coach that I worked with, we were meeting in the off season, and he's like, you know what, I'm trying to, reinvent myself and grow, but not forget that the things that got me here did help me be somewhat successful. Like, how do I learn and grow without straying too far from the nuts and bolts that got me here? How do you answer that question?
Well, I tell you, I think Feed the Cats is a leap of faith. I mean, to really just say we're not going to do anything with our sprinters more than 200 meters. We're going to learn to sprint far about 3 or 4 weeks before the first meet. We're going to start doing lactate work, and it's going to be hell, but we're going to be pretty good at it because we're fast. I think it's a leap of faith, and I call it drinking the Kool-Aid, because we're called a cult all the time. Like if somebody like attacks me, like my cult members go after him sometimes, and it's not really a cult though, because it's more like a cult following to a movie or something, where it's just a kind of a unified, like we all kind of agree that practices were way too miserable back in the day. And 95% of a kid's athletic life is practice.
Yeah, but Bear Bryant did it.
And, and boy, is that a disease, copying legendary coaches.
But the USA hockey team did it, and that's how they beat Russia.
Yes. And what people forget about every single legendary coach I can name had legendary advantages at the place they are. For example, like a guy who won 1,000 games in basketball in the state of Illinois, a guy named Gene Pingatore. Isaiah Thomas played for him. Well, they had a bus that would travel around Chicago picking up their players. It was a private school. And they had some tradition. The guy was a good coach, but hell, he won 28 games every year. He had to copy that guy's practices is silly, because he had legendary advantages that allowed him to beat other people. And so when people say, well, Alabama does it, we have to understand that Alabama should never get beat. They literally should never get beat every single guy that goes to Alabama in football expects to be in the NFL, and about 3/4 of them will. It is, 3/4 of Alabama's roster from 5 years ago spent some time in the NFL. And so what I say is not how are they winning? I say, how are they losing? How in the world would they ever lose? And so, yeah, copying, and I did the same thing. I think all coaches copy successful people. But I want to know how people are successful at Appalachian State, not Alabama. I want to find people that are high school coaches in public schools where the only athletes they have come from their neighborhood. And then how do they remain consistently good every year? That has to go to coaching and culture. So yeah, it's just a mess out there, because you can go down the wrong road and copy the wrong people. And the feed the cats thing is basically just saying that we're going to care about sprinting, even for college kids.
Last question I have, and then I'll let you go about the rest of your day, is, you talk about success and culture, and you jokingly said stuck in Illinois, but I think it's something important for our members to hear, just what it was like for you to have stability and be able to raise your children and just that life, because selfishly, that's what I want. I'm going to go out and say it, and people know that know me. I want to provide that stability. I want to provide that. And I want to be active in my wife and children's lives. So for somebody that's done it for a really, really long time, kind of talk about that and talk about, just how awesome it's been.
I think it's an important thing. I had an S&C guy tell me he was miserable recently. And he says, I got to get out of this place. And I said, well, I know of a really high paying high school teaching place that I could get, I get you work, and you could top out at 130. I said, how much do you make? He goes, 210. I go, well, shit, you're not going to be a high school teacher then, right? So I was broke all my life. My wife and I were both, bankruptcy in 2004. I had 4 kids going to 4 different schools and blah, blah, blah. And no, it's hard. It's not all great, but I tell you what, I can't convince anyone anymore to go, even the ones that want to coach someday, they don't want to teach. Teaching and coaching is hard.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
They're also the same though, in my opinion.
It is. But man, teaching 5 classes and putting up.
Yeah, yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like teaching, grading labs. Oh my goodness. I was tired by the time I got to practice every day. And, caffeine
You
corrects
got to
that.
feed the cats with being a teacher. Cut that homework shit out.
You don't think I learned how to do that? I worked myself into one of the easiest gigs of teaching chemistry. You don't have to work from bell to bell. I mean, people don't realize that. Like, you can get like a lot done in 20 minutes. So anyway, yes, I fed the cats everywhere. But that whole thing about working half the days of the year as a high school teacher, getting the same holidays as your kids. I mean, all four of my kids, my wife taught elementary, all four of them went to school with their mother for like their first 4 or 5 years of school. All four of my kids sat in my chemistry class.
Wow.
I sat in my dad's world history class. I mean, the family thing, and of course that's probably why 2 of my kids are coaches, and the third one runs my YouTube channel, and my daughter, she feeds the cats too. So anyway, but there's just something about having, the 3 best things about teaching: June, July, August.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just such a good life, even if we were poor. And really, in the last 7 years, for the first time, I'm not poor anymore. I mean, my wife and I still share a car, and yeah, it's not like we're rich or anything, but I don't have any anxiety about paying bills. So if I could do it over again in this modern world, I probably could have had some side hustles, like I'm doing now, where I'm making a little bit of money. But getting back to your point, I think that being a teacher is one of the most parent-friendly jobs in the world. And I think that's really important. I was so glad my dad was a teacher and a coach. I always say that coaches' kids have the greatest lives in the world until they have to play for their father. And then it's really complicated and sucks.
Yeah, no, I mean, my children come to, they come to work with me on Sundays. The players that travel, we just do it's a isometric tendon, bulletproofing area for just, like ankle, groin, knee, very, very low level. And then we stretch them just to make them feel good post game, because they have Thursday off. But my children come to work with me on Sundays, right? And,
how many kids you have?
I have 2, my 4.5 and almost 3-year-old, and they come and, they'll sometimes pre-lift, they're not helping me set up. They're running around being crazy, or, at the end of the lift or if I'm taking attendance, they'll like knuck the guys up. But it's, I try to, like you said, I blend the 2 worlds because I live less than a mile away from work. So
that's a key. That's one of the, if you're close enough to go home for lunch.
Oh, I do it all the time.
You're going to have a good life. You're going to have a good life. And then one last thing with your kids, I wish that every coach could see sports through their own kids before it's too late. Like your kids, you won't see high school sports with your kids for several years now. Yeah. But all 4 of my kids went through terrible situations at one time or another in high school sports, where the coach stole the joy of the sport from them. They came home miserable. And when you see that, then you open yourself up to maybe, making practice the best part of a kid's day is a good thing. I mean, you start to see it. I mean, if you saw your son come home from a football practice as a sophomore saying, I want to quit, it would hurt you, because this is our business. And I'm telling you, it happens a lot.
That's some heavy stuff. I think there's no better and powerful way to end right there. For our listeners that are maybe interested and they're like, hey, I've never heard of this feed the cat stuff. I've never heard of this guy, but now fuck it, I'm hooked. Where can they follow you and learn more about you?
I'm in charge of my Twitter account, pntrack.com, or not.com, pntrack, at pntrack. But my son, Troy, is a digital marketer, and he's in charge of my YouTube, my Insta. I've never seen it. And my TikTok. So
you got TikTok. You're ahead of me. I don't have TikTok yet.
I am on all platforms now. And then, if you just type it in, all my recent content's on CoachTube. Don't buy my stuff on Championship Production, even though it sets sales records for them, because that's like 5 years ago or something. All my recent content's at CoachTube, and that's a great place. And I love Wade Floyd, the CEO of CoachTube. It's amazing. You know, if you sell content on CoachTube, you know, you get like 98%.
Oh, wow.
98% of the sale, which is like unbelievable. It's really a great thing. So I got all that stuff. And I have like 200 articles out there floating around. I'm embarrassed about half of them, but you know
what? I can't thank you enough. This has been a blast for me. I hope that it is for our members too. So thank you very much for the time today, Coach. Go ahead and enjoy the rest of the day.
Justin, have a good time. See you.
See you.
Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more videos just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.